Hello and welcome to the European Resilience Initiative Center video podcast. Today our guest is Göran Swistek, security policy expert at the German Stiftung Wissenschaft und Politik, Foundation of Science and Policy, Berlin-based think tank which develops Germany foreign security policy. And he is also an active officer of the German Navy, a commander of German Navy. Hello, Göran.
Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you so much that you found time for this interview. And my first question is Germany a really player in foreign defense policy regarding maritime security?
Well, that's a long question or a difficult question you ask here, because we have an announced Zeitenwende from last year from a speech from the Chancellor. You probably know about it, but it hasn't materialized into strategic documents yet. So we don't really know how much the foreign policy will shift with this Zeitenwende. We have seen first steps in the actions taken by the government with regards to the support of Ukraine, delivering weapons, ammunition, etc. We have seen the shift also in the energy policy in Germany. But really how it materializes into a strategy, we are still waiting for a national security strategy coming out within the next weeks. And hopefully afterwards we can read more about the interests of our government and how we see the foreign policy acting in different areas, especially in the maritime domain.
Oh, great. But before that, we talk about the security challenges on the Black Sea, on the Baltic Sea, and what can be Germany's role into protecting the NATO on all these theaters. Don't forget to like, to share, to subscribe to our video channel, and get the full access to our amazing interviews with the guests. So, Göran, we have seen that within the last months, the Baltic Sea, which used to be a pretty calm sea for many decades, turned to be a place for some sort of tension. We have seen explosions on the Nord Stream pipeline. We have seen the tensions between the Russian scientific vessels and the NATO vessels. Do we control the Baltic Sea as the NATO?
Well, from a NATO perspective, you can assume we control most parts of the Baltic Sea. But the Baltic Sea, or in accordance with the United Nations Convention on the Law of Sea, the Baltic Sea can also be sailed or used by other ships, also by Russia. Russia has a right of free passage in the Baltic Sea, and Russia has two enclaves or two parts in the Baltic Sea. One is Kaliningrad Oblast, and the other one is the region around St. Petersburg, which are vital for Russia from a military side, but also economic side. So Russia will be always part in a peacetime situation of this Baltic Sea scenario. How that might change in a real conflict, that is different then. Because then the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea will be substituted to all the regulations in accordance with the humanitarian international law, the law of the armed conflict, where you can block areas, and there NATO has a better hand, because now with Finland already joined NATO and Sweden soon joining NATO, most of the countries around the Baltic Sea are NATO members, and they control with their assets, with their military capabilities, the region, yes.
There's a lot of issues you have mentioned already. Like first, the usage of the waterways during the peace, this safe passage rule, when you can use the territorial waters of other countries for safe passage, but also the military perspective of the Baltic Sea. Let me first ask about the military perspective. As far as we understand, the both Kaliningrad and Kronstadt, Petersburg areas are important for the Russian military strategy, also in the case of some tensions in the North Atlantic. Do I understand it correctly?
That's correct. So from a Russian military doctrine, you have the Baltic Fleet in the Baltic Sea region, mainly in Kaliningrad, but also in St. Petersburg. And their first task is to protect the open sea lines in the Baltic Sea, but also support other activities, like activities by the Northern Fleet. And the Northern Fleet is a vital element in Russian strategy, because it's home of the second strike capability of Russia, the nuclear assets. And if they want to be deployed to the North Atlantic region, to the North Sea, in order to at least threaten Europe, or maybe actually do some actions on Europe, then the support of the Baltic Fleet will be vital to block Baltic countries, NATO countries, before accessing the assets of the Northern Fleet. And then you have the connection of the Baltic Fleet protecting Russian logistics coming into the Baltic Sea as well. And there's a big narrow channel entering the Baltic Sea with the Danish Strait. And that will be an interesting part in a conflict, because everything has to pass through this narrow channel. If it's going to NATO allies or to Sweden or to Russia.
Please forgive me the very bold question, but after we have seen that on the Black Sea, a country which was not that famous for naval striking capacities like Ukraine managed to significantly diminish the capacities of the Black Sea of Russia, like sinking the flagship Moskva and hitting other ships. Can Russia reach the targets of blocking NATO countries on the Baltic Sea if the Russians would have that need?
Well, Russia has several offensive capabilities. From mines, which are important in the maritime domain, these are cheap weapons you can use to deploy to the sea and shape the geography. Because if you know there's a mine, but you don't know where it is exactly, you can't use the region, either with a warship nor with a civilian transportation ship or whatever, trade ship. The other aspect are missiles, surface missiles, land attack missiles. Russia has deployed a lot of them to Kaliningrad and can employ them against NATO. And I mean the whole bandwidth from different strike capabilities against air targets, surface targets, land targets, Kaliber missiles, Iskander missiles. There's a whole range available for Russia to use, and they can use it. They can, to a certain extent, maybe break a blockade. If they can overcome the combined power of NATO naval powers, then if it would concentrate on the Baltic Sea, I would doubt.
If we come one step back from that perspective of possible military confrontation and return back to the nowadays situation when NATO is not in the military conflict against Russia, but we know that the Russian ships, the Russian vessels use the right of safe passage to make precision maps of our internet cables, of our energy cables, of our equipment which is located under the sea, not only in the Baltic Sea, but also at the shore of Ireland, for example. How dangerous is that activity, and do we follow it?
Yes, we do follow it. It's very suspicious. Russia has developed since approximately 5 to 10 years a large amount of underwater and surface capabilities in the maritime domain, which are automated running or with nearly unmanned, maybe 1 or 2 people on board, small submarines like this, and they are capable to operate near critical infrastructure. Then, in addition, in Northern Europe, we have a large increase in critical infrastructure in the maritime domain. It's not just the seabed cables which are connecting our European countries and the United States, the transatlantic seabed cables. It's also pipelines, like the Nord Stream example. We do have a large increase in offshore wind parks. We have an increase in platforms that to tap on the natural resources in the maritime domain. And in the future, we will have also equipment in the maritime domain to store carbon in the bottom of the sea to reduce our carbon footprint. So there's a lot of things developing, and we see that Russia has an interest in exploring the areas where we build critical infrastructure. We have seen several hydrographic research ships, but also what we would call spy ships. We have seen the activities of warships, usually concentrated around the seabed cables. There are several incidents we have mapped in the last years, and especially you mentioned around Ireland, there are some transatlantic cables going to the United States, but also from the British island. We have seen Russia acting with naval warships and research warships, and with submarines and unmanned drones in the underwater domain. So that is highly suspicious. And then we have seen several incidents which we can't really get to the bottom. There was an incident in 2021 outside Norway where a large amount of cables connecting a maritime research facility were destroyed, and the sensors have been stolen or can't be found anymore. More than 3 kilometers of cable. The interesting point here is this research facility is co-located with a NATO exercise area. And with all the sensors, we have been able also to detect not just the wildlife at the sea, but also if there's someone hiding in the sea, a submarine or any ships going in and out. That was destroyed in 2021. Then in 2022, you had the seabed cable connecting northern Norway to Svalbard, to the very interesting satellite station called Svalsat, which was destroyed at a water level of around 400 to 1,000 meters depth. And this cable is so important because this satellite communication station is so far in the north, and with the rotation of the Earth, it has, better than any other satellite communication station, the opportunity to connect to as many satellites as possible all around the day. So that was destroyed, and investigation found out both acts have been acts of sabotage, deliberately done by an actor who can operate in such a depth with equipment and destroy it. And then we had Nord Stream also, and we still don't know really who's behind it. We can have an estimate based on plausibility, capabilities, opportunities, intent, and we can find out if we follow this plausibility that it must have been a state actor with such capabilities operating underneath the water surface. So there's a high risk for our critical infrastructure being the target of a state actor in a hybrid confrontation.
But that is exactly what is what is the question amid the situation before the possible military confrontation. When it is peacetime, you cannot just blame another opponent. You may say, like, I suspect it was you, I believe it was you, but the Russians always say, no, that were not us, and you cannot prove the opposite. So that is plausible deniability, although everything points out that it could be Russian vessels, yes. But they say no.
Yes, you probably will never have a picture of a diver or a submarine destroying the cable or a pipeline. So that's another key feature of the underwater domain. You can't really have a good picture of the underwater domain. From a satellite, you can't just look on the surface, but not underneath the surface. And we don't have all the hydroacoustic sensors to cover the huge maritime area we have. So just a few facts maybe for the understanding. 70% of the Earth are covered by sea, and just 30% of the Earth by land. And with the impact of climate change and rising sea level, this percentage is also rising. And we can't cover the whole range of the maritime domain with any kind of sensors to get a clear picture what is going on.
Yeah, that is like really scary, like the picture, like when we have like a hostile actor, which can be any country, but most probably Russia, who like acts actually in our exclusive economic activity zone and destroys our cable or another equipment, which is like pretty disturbing. But if we switch from the Baltic Sea to the Black Sea, the Black Sea is actually like the only sea now where we have active warfare, where we have like naval vessels being attacked and sunk. But this sea has turned into actually like a close conflict area between Russia and Ukraine without any NATO vessels. Does it change something in our importance and influence in the region?
So from the NATO side, I must say the opportunity to influence current actions in the Black Sea have been reduced with the outbreak of the war, because Turkey then used this opportunity to implement the Montreux, or the means from the Montreux Convention, and has control of the Bosporus straits of the Turkish straits, the Dardanelles, Bosporus, etc. So with that, Turkey informed all other state actors who are not belonging to the Black Sea region that any external ships are not welcomed in the Black Sea. And for Russia especially, no additional military ships will be allowed in the Black Sea. So that's a big lever Turkey currently has to influence the whole security architecture. So you currently have the war, the Russian aggression against Ukraine, and you have the concentration of Russian fleets around Crimea and Novorossiysk on the other side, and also Odessa on the Ukrainian side. Then also Ukraine trying to hit also Russian ships. But if you draw a line from the Donau Delta in Romania towards Novorossiysk, underneath that, we have still some kind of normal life and no or less military activities. The only thing how it's impacted, what we have seen in the last year, are drifting mines coming out from the area above this line between the Donau Delta and Novorossiysk.
If we look at this decision of Turkey, like based on the Montreux Convention, does it, after all, help Russia to continue to attack Ukraine using caliber missiles?
Yes and no, because the influence of other actors is minimized. Russia has, at least in its sphere of influence and interest, it still has in the Black Sea, some kind of freedom to act, where it can use its ships outside the range of Ukrainian weapons to attack Ukraine with caliber missiles, for example. But it also used the Caspian Sea for attacks like this. So it's not just in the Black Sea. On the other side, we see with the innovation from Ukrainian startups, from the military also coming up new drones, which have been able to attack Russian bases, Russian ships, and also some logistic facilities. And these drones are not just air drones, but also maritime drones on the surface, but also dived underneath the surface, subsurface drones. So that's a very interesting development here in the northern area of the Black Sea.
Before we go further with the topic of usage of new types of maritime warfare, like drones or other striking devices, don't forget to share, to like, to subscribe to our channel, and don't miss our next interviews. Well, what I really wanted to know, and this is a very personal question, when you first heard the news that the Moskva missile cruiser was hit, what was your first impression?
Well, that's a significant messaging activity, as the main ship for the Black Sea Fleet, the command ship, that has an important role. And it, by design, even if it's an old ship, it was an air defender. So a ship that was built to defend not just itself, but also a whole area or fleet against any air attack, like missiles. And then it was hit by missiles, 2 missiles, and sunk. Well, that has a strategic message to it. And the addition is, if you then mention that it was hit by Ukraine-made surface missile, well, that's a blow.
Like, how is it possible, like, to hit such a ship? Because, like, it should have like a lot of electronic warfare devices to jam the communication, also anti-air missiles, anti-air automatic guns, most probably. Like, how can it be? Like, it should be located. It should be pointed out that like targeted by the missiles. The missiles must be able to arrive to the ship. Like, how was it possible technically?
So if you put a ship like this in a war condition, you are usually on highly alert with your crew and all the sensors and weapon systems on board. What we know currently is that the Moskva was probably not in the best condition, not combat ready. Either the training of the crew, or neither the training of the crew nor the weapon systems and the sensors. Some have been even inoperable, not working since a long time, and the commanding officer of the ship wanted to replace them, but due to maybe issues in the logistics, corruption, whatever, it never received the required material to substitute or replace the damaged equipment. So if a ship like this is not fully functional, then it can't really defend against a threat. So putting then a ship like this into a conflict, into a war zone, is like a sitting duck. You put a sitting duck somewhere and wait to be sunk.
Well, that should like sound pretty harsh for the Russians when we call like their flagship a sitting duck. But most probably, the Russian Black Sea Navy has demonstrated that they are somehow like the Russian land forces, like a very capable striking force on paper, but not that good in reality. But when we come back to the topic of the new types of warfare with the drones, how much, how big was the role of the maritime drones used by the Ukrainian army during this war, and what is the future of the maritime drones?
Well, if we follow the Russian aggression and the war developing currently still in Ukraine, we can state two general statements about it. The first one is it's not what we expected from a future war. We expected from a future war more use of electronic warfare equipment, more cyber activities, more unmanned vehicles, but we still have the battle on the ground, ships, we have the trenches on land, we have mechanized capabilities on land, which are important still for this battle. So this is not the battle what we usually expected in Western Europe or in NATO to be a future type of battle. The other thing is, what we realized is that old-fashioned capabilities do play to a certain extent a role, but it's not the last war we fight. It's still different to the last war somebody has fought, like in Chechnya or Georgia. So we still have new innovations, and yes, it is in between a new and an old-fashioned war, something a mixture, and drones do play a more important role, we realized, but they need to be backed up still by regular conventional strike capabilities, by the protection, by reconnaissance, intelligence capabilities. So you need a whole package of this, and you need to have control of the electromagnetic spectrum or in region to really good employ them.
That is indeed what we observed, as the first strikes by the maritime drones were pretty successful as far as I remember, but then the Russians started to install these nets, like preventing the entrance into the harbor. So drones are not a Wunderwaffe, they're not like the silver bullet.
Yes, that's true. I fully agree. So they are part of a new strategy, but they are not as you said, the Wunderwaffe.
But what can we use from this experience of the Russian-Ukrainian war in the Black Sea? What could be the lessons for a possible, for example, confrontation in the Strait of Taiwan? Because what I hear from the Ukrainians is that there was all the time the discussion: should we have the large vessels like the flagships in conventional warfare, or should we have some sort of Mosquito fleet, like small vessels, drones, land-based missiles to deter the aggressor? Is it something, the same discussion which Taiwanese forces think about now, like how can they prevent a possible naval attack?
Well, what we can learn or what we see from the war is that you can substitute large ships, large expensive capabilities with smaller, more cheaper capabilities, and with less manpower required. Drones, land batteries, missiles coming from the shore, being towed by a truck and then being deployed against ships. Things like this are effective. It can be employed against an enemy with large ships and a lot of crew on it, and you just have maybe 4 people operating a drone or operating one of these land batteries with a missile against targeting a ship. So you can really counterbalance all the manpower and a possible aggressor will bring to the table with sophisticated, smaller capabilities, if they are employed in the right way, put in a whole strategy.
Uh, Do what we experience now, does it like change our views on the future of maritime combat, of naval combat?
Well, we would definitely see a shift to more autonomous vessels. I'm pretty sure in NATO, many countries are now working on it. Also to substitute the personal manning problem, because in many Western countries in the alliance, we realize we don't have enough personal resources to increase our armed forces. Even if we would like to increase our defense spending to 2 or 3% and also increase our armed forces, with the current structure of our population, it's just impossible to create larger armed forces. So we need a substitute, and drones or maybe land-based batteries to operate in the maritime environment are to some extent a good substitute. I mean, in a closed and very narrow maritime area like the Baltic Sea or maybe the Black Sea, that is actually a good opportunity. It's different if we now turn or if we then turn towards the North Atlantic or the open Atlantic or the Mediterranean Sea, where the distances are much larger.
That is a very important idea that we can like use the unmanned vehicles to control the waste areas of the sea in the open ocean. If we come back like to what you have mentioned with 2-3% of spendings for military needs, do we see now the change in the German perception of what we should spend for the military activities, and how will it impact our naval capacities?
Well, as the current budget of the German government is still in work in progress, I can't say a definite or give you a definite answer for Germany at least. What I can say from a German perspective is that we have currently a regular defense budget, what is expected not to rise much for the years to come. And then we have, in accordance with the Zeitenwende speech of the Chancellor from last year, a special budget of 100 billion euros being spent on certain capabilities. And we didn't spend much of the 100 billions last year. We will start to have a large spending or a good spending of this money maybe this year, and the largest amount will be probably by next year, by 2024. The interesting point is then we will probably hit around the 2% budget if you count the regular budget and the spending from the special budget together. And next year is 75 years anniversary of NATO. There will be a summit in Washington, and Germany can say, hey, we do hit the 2% GDP spending. But afterwards, a large part of the 100 billion is gone. In 2025, it will fall down, and we are coming back to 1.4, 1.3, 1.5% defense spending if the regular defense budget does not increase. And then we do have new capabilities being bought by this special budget, and they need to be maintained. They need a logistical chain. They need money, which we don't have yet placed in our regular budget for them.
Then that sounds like a pretty disturbing challenging, like to achieving that 2% benchmark in a short-term perspective, but being challenged in a long-term perspective is indeed what needs to be observed. And my last question would be, can the European Union be a significant military player on the naval perspective? We know that the EU has developed its new naval military doctrine, speaking even about the security of the seas in Indian Ocean or in Pacific Ocean. Is its claim which has substance behind it?
Well, if you define maritime security from the whole range of threats we are facing in maritime domain, climate change, migration, transnational crimes, piracy, up to military threats, then the European Union can play an important role, and it already does in certain areas. But if we focus on the hard military stuff, on the hard military side of security, then NATO is actually more equipped, better fitted to provide security than the European Union does in this state actor confrontation. But if we look in the non-conventional or non-traditional security aspects like climate change, protection of resources like fishery, etc., and other resources, piracy, the European Union is already acting. We have an operation of the European Union in the Gulf of Guinea outside Africa, where the European Union is active, and the European Union with its maritime strategy wants to be even more active in order to support international law, the International Convention on the Law of Sea, or the freedom of safe passage in international waters. And I can imagine that in these non-really military areas, the European Union will be more active in the years to come.
That is an amazing perspective. Thank you so much for having been with us. We have had today an interview with Göran Swistek, who is a commander of German Navy and security expert at German Berlin-based Stiftung Wissenschaft und Politik security think tank. Thank you for having with us. Don't forget to share, to like, to subscribe to our channel. Don't miss our next stunning interviews. Stay safe. Have a great day.